I'd like to welcome you and in fact extend a very warm welcome to everybody here in this room attending the inaugural India-South Africa Business Summit of 2018. It is a first of its kind and it is being held, as you know, at the Sandton Convention Center in Johannesburg. Ladies and gentlemen, there are perhaps no two older friends than India and South Africa. Many of you are very familiar of that history and will know that that history dates back some 200 years. To be precise, when the first Indians arrived in Durban port aboard the SS Truro in 1860. I know that predates a lot of us, in fact, every one of us here in this room. But we go back to the 7th of June, 1893, when a young lawyer, Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, was evicted in Pietermaritzburg from a first-class train compartment while traveling from Durban to Pretoria, from where was lit a spark which changed the course of modern history. This special link between two old friends, or the golden thread that ANC stalwart O.R. Tambo spoke of, was also recognized by Madiba when he had said that the soil of India lies in South Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, 2018 marks the 25th year of the establishment of diplomatic relations between India and South Africa. It marks the 20th year of a strategic partnership that was sealed by the Red Fort Declaration in 1997. It also marks the 125th year of the Pietermaritzburg incident involving Mahatma Gandhi, and of course the centenary of Madiba. There can therefore be no better setting to this historic event that is taking place today, which provides a wonderful platform for two old friends to come together in a new era of shared prosperity between our two countries and people. I would like to extend a special recognition and wish the dignitaries present in the plenary session of the India-South Africa Business Summit. The Honorable Commerce and Industry and Civil Aviation Minister of India, Mr. Suresh Prabhu. The Honorable Trade and Industry Minister of South Africa, Dr. Rob Davies. Honorable Minister of Public Enterprises, Mr. Pravin Gordhan. The Honorable Minister for Small Business Development, Ms. Lindiwe Zulu. I'd also like to extend a warm welcome to the government officials from the countries of Mozambique, Zambia, Swaziland, and Lesotho. I'd like to recognize the Honorable Premier of the Gauteng province, Mr. David Makura. Also distinguished CEOs from India, South Africa, and the SADC countries, investors, analysts, specialists, and members of the media. Well, let's get straight to it. Our first speaker today will be the High Commissioner of India. And High Commissioner Ruchira Kamboj is a senior and respected Indian career diplomat who has served in various capacities in Indian diplomatic missions in Paris, Mauritius, New York, London, and Cape Town. Ms. Kamboj was also India's first and only woman Chief of Protocol and has recently served as India's ambassador to UNESCO Paris before formally taking charge as India's High Commissioner to the Republic of South Africa and the Kingdom of Lesotho in August 2017.
I'm honored to welcome you all to the opening of the India-South Africa Business Summit in this beautiful convention center at Sandton. Honorable Minister Suresh Prabhu, Minister Rob Davies, Minister Praveen Gordhan, Minister Zulu, Premier Makura, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Government of India, allow me to express my deepest gratitude to the Government of South Africa, which has so graciously supported us through this effort. I see this as a powerful symbol among so many marks of support and of the depth of our partnership. Minister Suresh Prabhu from India and Ministers Davies, Gordhan and Zulu and Premier Makura from South Africa, we are deeply grateful for your participation at this monumental summit. The involvement of top captains of industry from South Africa and India speaks of the enthusiasm, commitment, and engagement of business on both sides to grow this partnership. This is an important moment. The summit is above all an act of faith. An act of faith between two old partners and friends who are united through a shared history of oppression, struggle, and hardship, who sealed a strategic partnership 20 years ago through the Red Fort Declaration, and where today this partnership straddles diverse spheres and sectors to the benefit of our two countries and people. Importantly, this partnership is not just about the undeniable, unbreakable ties of solidarity that have bonded people and ignited liberation movements within India and South Africa. This partnership is also about a shared future. Through synergies, through shared strengths, and through our membership in multilateral settings where we seek constantly to engage, deliberate, and collaborate. Significantly, there are new beginnings at the summit to this new growth story between two old friends. Through the Memorandum of Understanding that will be inked later this morning between Invest India and Invest South Africa, and which will set the scene for the next phase of economic relations between our two countries. Through the release of the CII-sponsored white paper, which spotlights the good work being done by Indian businesses in South Africa, with an accent on localization, skilling South Africans, and working in a collaborative spirit for mutually beneficial growth and progress. Through a coming together of business from both sides via the mechanism of the India-South Africa CEOs Forum that seeks to deepen and widen the trade basket in complementing sectors of trade and industry. Going forward, we must unlock and combine the full range of our collective resources and strengths to encourage inclusive growth and embolden development in both our countries in the effort to dignify all. So together, let's crack the code and push for enriched trade and investment for the benefit of our two countries and people. Thank you.
Thank you, High Commissioner. I would now like to introduce our next speaker, Mr. Anil Agarwal, who is the chairman of Vedanta Resources, a leading Indian businessman and philanthropist. Vedanta Resources is also the 6th largest global diversified natural resources company with over 100,000 employees. Vedanta has invested $33 billion in India and $4 billion in Africa. Mr. Agarwal has pledged 75% of his personal wealth to philanthropic initiatives focused primarily on education and health for women and children. Mr. Agarwal came to South Africa with Prime Minister Modi's delegation in 2016. And during this visit, he committed to invest a further $1 billion in Africa. And that was despite very difficult market conditions that I know many business people in this room are quite familiar with. Mr. Agarwal is also the single largest shareholder in Anglo American, and he has played a pivotal role in working with the management of Anglo American to remain committed to investments in South Africa. You may have heard of him recently in headlines here in South Africa when Mr. Agarwal announced a new addition to his team in the form of the former boss of Anglo Gold Ashanti. We call him Venkat here in South Africa. That group was sad to hear him leave, but I'm sure that Mr. Agarwal is very happy to have him join the team. Mr. Agarwal, the floor is yours.
I think she has said everything. I have nothing else to add. So, Honorable Minister, Mr. Prabhu. Prabhu's name is a God who looks after everybody, and that's what exactly he's doing. He's the Minister for Aviation, so he's in the air. He's a Minister for Industry, so he makes sure that as much as employment can be created, and he is the Minister for the Commerce. So this is one of the most eminent ministers in India, and I'm very pleased that I'm with him. And Mr. Davis, I met him yesterday, the Commerce and Industry Minister of South Africa. Praveen Gowda, some of the other dignitaries, all protocol observed. I'm really honored to be invited to this business summit and have been very pleased to have participated initiative strengthen business between India and South Africa. I had the opportunity to hear the speech of President Ramaphosa in Commonwealth Summit in London. I must tell you honestly, I have never seen such a firing speech what he was that evening. The entire hall, the audience, the press, the way he come across as a true leader and very impatient to take his country forward. It was great to hear such leaders emerging. One side Mr. Modi, other side Ramaphosa, who's emerging as a great leader. When he said, I'm looking $100 billion investment in South Africa, you know, your head stand, the 3 or 4 years, what was going on and the whole somersault, what he's talking about, transformation, he says everybody is equal, I'm going to take my country forward. So it was very satisfying and he really created a very strong presence in England. I was part of delegation, as she mentioned, with Mr. Modi. It was very interesting. At that time, things were not great. And he said, what can I do for South Africa? Can you announce a project? And instantly we announced $1 billion investment for mining. This mine, you will be surprised, this mine was stand still for the last 40 years in Northern Cape. Very difficult to open up. But we are very pleased. We have invested $1 billion. The mine which was there for 40 years has opened. Directly, indirectly, 25,000 people are working. Whatever you say, I'm the witness. For taking almost 30 clearances, it was dealt with very professionally. Each office has cooperated. Whatever people talk about South Africa, things get delayed, is absolutely wrong. We are the witness. They have given all the government officers timely clearance. We started the mine and we are in process of starting the mine. My Prime Minister Modi also mentioned, what can we do for the South African company to work in India? India, as you know, the geology of India and South Africa is same, is fall apart. So what you have, gold, copper, zinc, iron ore, coal, we all have same in India, but we do not have mining culture. We still have import base. And you'll be surprised, we have taken 3 or 4 contractors from here. They've done a wonderful job for us, opening of our zinc mine, our copper business. They've done a phenomenal job at half the cost from South Africa. It is a high time. The Western world has moved forward. It is a time for us to eradicate our poverty, to create jobs. And what we can do, because we are blessed, we believe in Almighty God, we are blessed with a natural resource, above the ground, below the ground. Let's put ourselves together and work towards taking forward. What is the world? World is 1.3 billion people in China, 1.3 billion people in India, and 1.3 billion people in Africa. So what left? This is the time for Africa and India to be together, to work shoulder to shoulder to eradicate our poverty, create jobs, and whatever from India side we can do, we will do it. India has tremendous potential about technology, IT, innovation, and developing the skill development. When I hear our President Ramaphosa here, he is very keen to develop the skill development, and I'm going to talk to our people how we can work together so we can develop as much as skill development. And the biggest mantra is to develop the SMEs. From India, from South Africa, we don't want to sell raw material. We want this raw material to be processed in South Africa. When I took over, 21% largest shareholder of Anglo-American decided to leave South Africa. And the moment I become the largest shareholder of Anglo-American, I advise them, every resource company has the origin. If you see the Exxon, they will say, we are very proud being American. BHP will say, we are very proud being an Australian. If you see Brazilian company, they will say, we are very proud of Brazilian company. Even the BP, British Petroleum, which has only 10% business in UK, they talk that you are a British company. Why we shy away Anglo-American to say that we are South African company? It is originated from here. I'm very pleased the management has accepted. They wanted to exit from the coal, iron ore, give up the platinum. They are holding. Today, after doing that, the share price of Anglo-American has gone up by 50%. They can't take us for granted. We have to move forward. And this is the time India and Africa be together. I'm very pleased. Last night was phenomenal. What a beautiful function. I've been told that time is very short, so I'll be very short. So last time I really enjoyed the dinner. I was very proud that the Khadi, because Gandhi wanted every household, every woman to work and earn something. And that was the Khadi came in. And I saw beautiful Khadi fashion parade was done. And it was phenomenal function. I had some of my friends, some of the very dignitaries who I met. So I'm looking forward to do more and more business in Africa. You please tell us what I need to do with the Anglo-American. Whatever you will say, I will make sure I'll communicate, and Anglo-American remain pride of South Africa. We have discussed in Anglo and said, look, there are millions of acres of land for the exploration. Can we use some of the land for the agriculture? And they have agreed. So this will be another thing which we'll be taking up. I'm very pleased that Mr. Prabhu is here, who is taking forward and taking, he's so busy taking a time to come here and to make South Africa, India together. So thank you very much.
So I think you'll find that a lot of your shareholders so far are very happy with what Anglo is doing. They're really enjoying the dividends that they're seeing from the mining company. And Minister Zulu, I think you'll certainly take comfort in the words that the mantra is small businesses, and also is ensuring that beneficiation is actually done locally in South Africa. So I look forward to hearing what you have to say about that. As we move on, IT has just been highlighted as one of the key areas ripe for development. And so, ladies and gentlemen, I do have the honor to invite to the mic Mr. Sipho Maseko, who is the CEO of Telkom, government's poster child of how to run a parastatal efficiently and profitably. Mr. Maseko has been Group CEO and Executive Director of Telkom since April 2013. He earlier served as CEO and COO of British Petroleum South Africa and also MD of Vodacom South Africa. He is credited with successfully turning Telkom around. Mr. Maseko, over to you.
Thank you very much to yourself, Ms. Peters, as the Program Director, Honorable Ministers Davies, Prabhu, Godan, and Zulu, Premier Makura, the Commissioner of India to South Africa, and all protocols observed. Mine will be a very, very short task to talk about briefly the way we see the potential of the relationship in a very formalized way between South Africa and India. If you go back to the icons that have been projected from last night to today, there's been a conversation about Nelson Mandela and Mahatma Gandhi. And what characterizes those people? First and foremost, they were broadly very selfless people who put the interests of their countries and their people ahead of everything else. Secondly, they made a lot of personal sacrifices to make sure that their countries move forward, not only they themselves as individuals. If you look at their personal lives, and if they had chosen not to pursue the conviction of struggle and freedom, theirs would have been a different life. It would have been a life of villas in France, of private jets, of holiday homes in very exotic areas. But they decided not to do that. They decided to serve their people and make sure that they don't leave their people behind and move forward. So therefore, those of us who work in state-owned companies, we've begun to come together and say, how can we begin to change the narrative around state-owned companies? How can we begin to make sure that there's leadership of principle? We make sure that there is progress. We make sure that there is a demonstrable effort that we put in place, working with government in most part to make sure that we can create the right organizational construct. To this end, a couple of us have come together. It's a group of about 8 or so people who've decided that we will create a forum, which essentially is a forum of state-owned entities, which I was given the task to convene. That forum is made up of a couple of entities. Obviously, Telkom is there, IDC, SAA, the IDC, the Development Bank of South Africa, the Airports Company, the PIC, and all of us have decided that there is a number of 4 key principles that we need to start working on. The first one is governance. Over the last couple of years, because of the lack of a very formalized relationship between state-owned companies, government, and business, we've realized that state-owned companies have had a very negative perception around in the country and abroad. And one of the things we want to assure both business in South Africa, the government as a shareholder, and our partners in India, that we've begun the reformation process of those state-owned companies. And what does that reformation process represent? It represents a number of things. Firstly, a commitment to good governance. And how do we make sure that we put in place a model where governance as a principle in how these organizations are run remains very, very cardinal. How we make sure the right people are on the right seats doing the right things, because these assets don't belong to us. They belong to our shareholders, and we need to make sure that at all times we do the best that we can with them. The second thing is around transformation, in particular focused on young people and women. Why young people? The future, as people have always said, belongs to them. More than 50% of our population in this country is below the age of 30. And how do we make sure that in 30 years' time, when many of us have moved on, they have a future in a country that they would have been able to recognize, and also they can continue to contribute to it. So we focus a lot around that, but also not just around young people, but also giving them the skills and the tools that they will need in the new digital future. So there's also going to be a very, very strong bias around how do we create a digital future for young people? How do we invest in programs like coding and software development? And we see all of that as the base infrastructure upon which all investment that will come will find a very sound enabling environment. So transformation in the form of young people and women is the second one. The third one is around how do we reform the SOCs themselves? What is the reformation process? Many of them have been around at least for the last 60 years, but their mandate has not been revised so that they can have a future outlook for the next 60 years. So the most important thing that we are grappling with is not just how do we look at fixing issues of the past, but how do we confront the challenges of the future, because the world is changing in front of our very own eyes. Do we train people differently? Do we invest differently? Do we focus a lot more, for instance, in providing the base infrastructure that will be the catalyst for future investment? So that's the third principle around making sure that going forward, as we reform these state-owned entities, they can become strong anchors in the economy. They can be the basis upon which people can say they will come and invest in this country, whether it's in the mining sector or it's in the technology sector, whether it's in aviation or in education. It doesn't matter. We think that we have the responsibility to provide the base infrastructure investment. Last but not least, it's in the area of ensuring that the compact between the shareholders, which is largely government, and what is called the developmental mandate of the country is paramount. If you look at the world, there's probably out of the industrial era in the last 200 years, there's probably about 4 or 5 places that were not touched by the industrial era. China, India, South America, and Africa. And the trouble is that if we don't adjust to how we think the economy ought to look like over the next 100 years will be left behind, not just for 5 years, but for 100 years. China probably caught up in the last 50, 60 years. They built highways, they built factories, they built bridges, but many countries have not caught up. And therefore, how do we ensure that the next digital era does not leave us behind? More importantly, doesn't leave our people behind, because all of us who are here represent a very, very small fraction of the populations of our continents. Yet at the same time, the responsibility that we have on our shoulders is a lot more massive. So for us, therefore, not just from a technology area, but more as the core of the state-owned enterprises, for us this is a dream come true, a formal relationship between South Africa and India that is largely predicated around commerce, that is largely predicated around equality, that is largely predicated around making sure that we can both make progress in how we move things forward. And it's a commitment that we make to shareholders and to everyone here that will collaborate in all forms, and we're looking forward to be part of this event over the next day or so. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Maseko. Right, ladies and gentlemen, a man who I imagine is very pleased that this conference and a conference of such a nature is taking place in his terrain. I would like to welcome the Honorable Premier of Gauteng, that is David Makhura. And Mr. David Makhura is the popular Premier of the Economic Hub of South Africa, Gauteng Province, and he has been in this post since 2014. He was part of the underground structures of the ANC and the South African Communist Party. He is a trustee of the board of the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation. And amongst his passions, I have come to really know is how to transform the township economy, drive youth employment, as Mr. Maseko has spoken about, and also drive inclusive economic growth, as we heard this being the passion of Mr. Agarwal as well. Premier, over to you.
Thank you very much, Fifi. The Honorable Minister, Mr. Suresh Prabhu, Minister Davis, Minister Gordon, Minister Zulu, ministers from our sister countries in the SADC region, and the high commissioners from these respective countries to South Africa, the High Commissioner of India to South Africa, the representatives of the provincial and local spheres of government. I saw the mayor of Nelson Mandela Bay here, the CEOs and captains of commerce and industry who are here with us, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the provincial government and the people of Gauteng, I welcome you all to the inaugural India-South Africa Business Summit 2018. I welcome you to Gauteng Province, the economic engine of South Africa and the manufacturing hub of the SADC region. I welcome you to Johannesburg, Africa's financial nerve center. This year's summit draws particular significance as it's taking place in this important year in the unfolding India-South Africa relations. The year 2018 marks the 25th year of the establishment of diplomatic relations between South Africa and India, the 125th anniversary of the Pietermaritzburg train incident, where Mahatma Gandhi was forcibly removed from a whites-only carriage in a train in Pietermaritzburg, and the centenary of the birth of the founding father of our democratic nation, President Nelson Mandela. We in Gauteng are honored to host this important summit. The rapidly growing trade and investment relations between India and South Africa and the entire SADC region are a culmination of centuries old of cultural and economic ties between the Indian subcontinent and sub-Saharan Africa. Our people have related and interacted together for more than 200 years. We are indeed joined at the hip by a shared history and common heritage. It is true that we now need to grow together and ensure shared prosperity, as the theme of this summit suggests. So, ladies and gentlemen, the bond of friendship and solidarity between the peoples of South Africa and of India is unbreakable. We share heroes and heroines who led the struggle of our people against colonialism and racial oppression in India and in South Africa. President Nelson Mandela had the following to say about the relationship between India and South Africa. And I quote, "As much as India is a particle of our country, so we too are a particle of India. History has condemned us to seek each other out, to deal with each other as members of the same family," close quote. So South Africa, as we all know, is home to one of the largest Indian diaspora communities in the world. South Africans of Indian descent constitute an integral part of our democratic nation. From an economic point of view, Indian companies have been playing an important role in the post-apartheid reconstruction and transformation of the South African economy. Trade and investment between our two countries is increasing at a very rapid rate. For the period 2010 to 2017, as some of you would hear a lot in the next few hours, South Africa's exports to India grew from $1.8 billion to $4.6 billion, while South Africa's imports from India also grew substantially from $1.7 billion in 2010 to $4.3 billion in 2017. Trade between Gauteng province in particular and India almost mirrors that of our national economies. Also notable is that Gauteng maintains a favorable trade balance with India, as is the case with South Africa. Gauteng's exports to India rose from $1.4 billion in 2010 to $3.4 billion in 2017, whilst Gauteng's imports from India more than doubled from $1.1 billion in 2010 to $2.5 billion in 2017. Just over the past 4 years, Indian companies have brought more than 30 FDI projects into the Gauteng economy, and these projects are worth more than 345 million rands. Ladies and gentlemen, the issues that this summit is going to be discussing are indeed of great interest for us as we enter a new phase of struggle in our country. And that phase of struggle is going to focus on the socio-economic transformation of our country in order to build a more inclusive economy and shared prosperity. The agenda of this summit addresses, therefore, these issues that are close to our hearts. And what are they? Building ecosystems for startups, building industrial capacity for mineral and food processing, healthcare, women entrepreneurship, the automotive sector, and the fourth industrial revolution. As you may all know, all these are the key pillars of the Gauteng economy. And India and South Africa also have a shared enormous challenge with regard to poverty and inequality. But we also have a shared determination to overcome these challenges and build more equal societies and inclusive economies. Whatever difficulties we may be encountering as the two nations, we are not bound to give up. As Mahatma Gandhi would say, and I quote, "You must not lose faith in humanity. Humanity is an ocean. If a few drops of an ocean are dirty, the ocean does not become dirty," close quote. As Nelson Mandela said, "We are members of the same family, and we shall not lose faith in our ongoing efforts to build a thriving and inclusive economy, both in South Africa and in India, but to do so in a way that is mutually beneficial, honest, and clean." Let us indeed not give hope, because there will always be a few dirty drops in our beautiful ocean. Let India and South African business people also be a force for good and promote ethical business leadership, because the global economy is faced with a challenge with regard to ethical business practices. Let us, as the two nations, also never give up in our efforts to build the type of economies where nobody is left out, in the true spirit of our great icons who we share, Mahatma Gandhi and Nelson Mandela. I would like to say South Africa is open for business, and Gauteng is indeed open for business. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Premier. And of course, as we have been hearing about the importance of good governance in both the public and the private sector, and a minister who has sort of become synonymous with good governance lately is, I know I need not say his name, but I shall, the Honourable Minister of Public Enterprises, Mr. Pravin Gordhan, known in some corners as the first public servant citizen in South Africa. Now, Mr. Pravin Gordhan hails from Durban, and the name Pravin, I am told, is Sanskrit origin, and it rightly means knowledgeable, skillful, and proficient. They named you well. Just a moment more. He attended the Sastry College, formerly an all-Indian boys' school in Durban. He was associated with the Natal Indian Congress and later the South African Communist Party. Mr. Gordhan is a pharmacist by training and has served as South Africa's Honourable Minister of Finance from 2010 to 2014, came back again in 2015, and also had a brief stint as the Minister of Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs. Minister Gordhan's presence in government has always provided a lot of certainty, particularly in the investment and the business corners, and a lot of comfort that South Africa's economy is headed in the right direction. I know his words are going to do exactly just that. Mr. Gordhan.
Good morning, Dumelang, Sanbonani, Namaskar. Welcome to Minister Prabhu and his delegation to South Africa. He's been here many times. He's even been to my hometown. So, Premier, you and I are competing, Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal. My colleagues, Ministers Davies and Zulu, the Premier of Gauteng, the High Commissioner, our colleagues from SACU and SADC, and members of the business community represented here today. I'm just a supporting act. Our Indian colleagues represent Bollywood. I'm just a supporting actor to my colleague, Minister Davies. But as Mr. Maseko correctly reminded us, we meet in the embrace, if you like, of Mahatma Gandhi and Nelson Mandela. An embrace which tells us about the kind of values and actions that they stood for. And the question, of course, that the current generation is faced with is how do we represent those values and actions in today's very complex 21st century? It's nice to proclaim the heritage that we both have as Indian citizens and South African citizens, The real challenge for us, whether in business or in government, is how to play out that heritage in today's terms. The kind of humanity and human rights that they fought for, the freedom for each of our countries that they both represented and sacrificed so much for, and the kind of community of nations that they believed in and throughout their lives represented, whether it was in the trading sector, in the cultural sector, in the spiritual sector, or just in respect of global peace and relations as well. Today, South Africa and India share many common platforms. The BRICS formation, which meets later this year in South Africa in the form of its summit, where all the leaders of the BRICS countries will be represented once again at the summit. The G20, which is another arena in which India and South Africa have cooperated. And our two ministers, Prabhu and Davies, represent us in the World Trade Organization and have developed a lot of common ground in respect of the kind of issues that they are confronted with. But over and above the transactional level in which all of us will be concerned about for the next 24 to 48 hours, in other words, what deal can I make with whom, if I can put it in simple terms. We need to just raise the bar a little bit as India and South Africa as well, particularly if we proclaim to be the children of Mahatma Gandhi and Nelson Mandela. Because we've got to ask ourselves, what will inclusive growth mean for our small 55 million population, but India's 1.3 billion population, and indeed probably 6 billion people who stand marginalized in most economies and countries of the world. Inequality remains a challenge both in the Western world or the developed world and in our own country. Business confidence has certainly been increasing in recent times, with the IMF saying that growth is pursuing a greater path. India's numbers, Mr. Prabhu, if one of the things you could export to us is your GDP numbers, then we would at least numbers-wise look a little bit better. But in South Africa, as we know, ladies and gentlemen, as President Ramaphosa has declared, we do indeed have a new dawn. And I'll come back to that. But that new dawn has created an immense new spirit in the country and confidence in the business community, which I hope will be reflected in the talks that we have going on today. It's also increased the level of public trust, which in many countries of the world is declining between business and government elites on the one hand and citizens on the other hand. And as the elite here, both political and business, we have to not only, as I said, transact on that which we have to, but also raise the bar and ask ourselves, what is it that we can do to increase the public's confidence in ourselves? And that confidence will only be increased, as Amartya Sen says, not by fancy models and formulae, but by the actual experience people have of the difference that growth and investment actually makes in their lives. So if people without water get water, if people without shelter get shelter, if young people without hope and jobs get more hope and jobs, then we are beginning to make a difference in the lives of people and earn their confidence as well. And in that sense, we share the quest for more jobs for all of our citizens, for a new set of skills, as Mr. Maseko and others were pointing out, to the newer generations of young people that are growing up in society, because clearly yesterday's skills are not good enough for tomorrow. And how we prepare our young people for tomorrow is probably the greatest challenge that our generation has. How do we also contribute to sustainable growth in the broadest sense of the word and meet the sustainable development goals that the world has set for itself is a crucial challenge as well. One of the conversations that is happening at a global level, including in quarters such as the World Bank and the IMF, is how do we ensure that the benefits that accrue from these GDP and other numbers that we often refer to are benefits that are also accruing to what we would call ordinary citizens in our society. And that's one of the big challenges that globalization in its current form presents for all of us. So yes, it's done a fantastic amount to increase trade, to spread technology. I don't tweet, I'm sure many of you do, and enabled us to communicate with that. But one of the morning newspapers today warns us about tweets as well. A study done by MIT shows that 75% of the information contained in these tweets is false. So welcome to the era of fake news as well. But we live in the real time, and this is not fake news. This conference is actually happening. The High Commissioner, when she approached me, said that India and South Africa need to open a new chapter in our lives. And as President Ramaphosa said, that this new dawn must mean that citizens benefit, as I said, from what government does and what the private sector does. But more importantly, the institutions of government, and in particular in this instance, in my instance and the instance of my colleagues, state-owned enterprises need to move in a very different direction from the past era of what we call state capture in South Africa. And so as we look at the opportunities and you look at what kind of enterprises you combine your efforts in, let's also remind ourselves that the current global situation itself poses a number of risks that we as BRICS-related countries have the possibility of both mitigating on the one hand and contributing to developing a new direction on the other hand. The risks are that we might yet have another financial crisis, although we think we've just recovered from the 2008, 2009 crisis. The risk is that trade as we know it in the multilateral era through the work done at the WTO might not be the kind of trade that we would see in 2 or 3 years' time, given the kind of tweets that emerge from different parts of the world. You're not laughing at that one. And similarly, whilst technology is playing an important part, serious questions are being raised about big data and artificial intelligence and the fourth industrial revolution, and whether as countries and as people, we are ready and able to cope with the kind of changes that they will actually demand. So with respect, I would suggest that business leaders today not only need to look at the transactional level, which I'm sure many of us will do today, but also begin to throw up the new Mandelas and the new Mahatma Gandhis in the 21st century, who will say to us that there's a new way in which economies can grow in a more sustainable and inclusive way. We found new ways in which to decrease inequality and poverty in our countries. And as we do so, let's reinforce the multilateral nature of the global relations that we've actually had, ensure that more trade happens, including the localization that Mr. Agarwal was speaking of earlier on, and ensure that the gap between rich and poor is in fact narrowed as well. So the opportunities exist for us. I see the CEO of SAA here, to once again establish the Joburg-Mumbai or Joburg-Delhi linkage. I'm not sure who stands accused of giving it up in the first place, but we'll discover that sooner or later. Secondly, there's a lot of room for us to learn from one another in respect of better governance, but more importantly, more effective business models as far as state-owned enterprises are concerned. And Mr. Prabhu here represents a person who turned the Indian railways around, so perhaps he can share that experience with us and teach us a thing or two as well. And as has been pointed out, technology, IT, skills training, over and above the normal commerce and imports and exports are all areas that we could capitalize on. And finally, let me congratulate Mr. Agarwal on making Mr. Ramaphosa's 100 billion target now 99 billion. Thank you very much.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much, Minister Gordon. And of course, the SAA CEO, Mr. Vuyani Jagana, I hope you're up for the challenge in a still challenging environment for you. But I am told we are welcomed, or we are graced with the presence of the Ministers of Trade from Botswana. They are here. Would like to just formally welcome them. Thank you. And we also have the Honorable Minister of Trade and Industry of Lesotho, Mr. Defo Mapesela. The Minister of Small Business Development of Lesotho, Mr. Chalanela Pori. The Minister of Investment of Trade and Industry of Botswana, as we have just heard, and Minister of Trade and Industry of Mozambique. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we're talking trade, so it's only prudent that we hear from the Ministers of Trade, and it is my privilege, rather, to now welcome on stage the Minister of Trade and Industry for South Africa, Dr. Rob Davies. Just some brief background on Mr. Davies before he takes to the floor. He has been the Minister of Trade and Industry of South Africa since May 2009. And Dr. Davies was a very active anti-apartheid activist, a member of the South African Communist Party, and post-apartheid, he has been the Deputy Minister of Trade and Industry and the Chairman of the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee on Finance. Before entering Parliament, Mr. Davies was Professor and Co-Director of the Centre for South African Studies at the University of the Western Cape. Now, it's actually very comforting to have him in the country because most of the time he's barely around. He's exploring various opportunities for trade and investment opportunities for companies in South Africa. But Minister Davies, it's over to you.
Thank you very much, Program Director. Let me greet our distinguished guest, the Honourable Mr. Suresh Prabhu, the Minister of Commerce and Industry of India, also a very good friend of mine in a number of forums that we engage in. Let me also greet my ministerial colleagues from South Africa, Ministers Gordon and Zulu, of course the Premier of the province, Premier Makura, the High Commissioner, the business leaders who've spoken from the platform, but also ministerial colleagues, in addition to the list you gave, ministerial colleagues from Botswana, Lesotho, Mozambique. I believe there's a minister from Eswatini and also from Zambia. Let me greet my colleagues from those countries. I've seen also we have a mayor present, so let me greet the mayor of Nelson Mandela Bay. And really, I think the first point to make is that this is a wonderfully large audience that has come to this, the very first India-South Africa Business Summit. I want to start off by thanking the High Commissioner and Minister Prabhu for making sure that we have with us a high caliber business delegation from India. Also that there was and I'll speak about it a little bit later, a CEO's forum meeting that took place yesterday, and we engaged with the CEOs yesterday afternoon, Minister Prabhu and myself, and that's been a very productive meeting. Of course, as previous speakers have indicated, this business summit is taking place against the background of commemorating our two icons, Nelson Mandela and Mahatma Gandhi, respectively. I think that last night, and in the indications that have been made here by previous speakers, which I'm not going to repeat, both of those have ended up as being global icons, champions of the values that we should be aspiring to, but also that there's a lot of historical intersections between the role that they played in their own country, and also in the case of Mahatma Gandhi, the fact that he was also a political activist here in South Africa. A point I made yesterday, which I think is well worth repeating in the context of a business summit like this, is that during our own struggle for liberation in South Africa, India was at the forefront of providing solidarity, and that included the fact that India was the first country to call for sanctions against apartheid and was a consistent implementer of sanctions against apartheid. And so what this meant was that as of the early 1990s, economic relations between South Africa and India were practically non-existent. There was practically no trade, and there was practically no investment relations. And I think it's important that we understand that, because in actual fact, over the years, since our democracy in South Africa, we've developed a strong partnership with India, represented in our common membership of a number of organizations, BRICS, IBSA, the Indian Ocean Rim, a number of groupings that we participate in together in the WTO, I'm sure in the IMF as well, in the G20, in the non-aligned movement. We are all fellow participants in those international groupings. And of course, this is not the first time that we have been talking about developing bilateral economic relations. And I think it is important that we do recognize that we have over the years made some progress in our bilateral relations. India has come from nowhere in the 1990s to become between our 6th and our 8th largest trade partner, taking exports and imports together. So India is a significant trading partner for South Africa now. Indeed, our bilateral trade has been growing. So if we take the period from 2012 until 2017, this saw an increase in our bilateral trade from about 68 billion South African rands to 107 billion South African rands. It has been growing. We've also seen, I think, a growing and significant investment relationship between our two countries. We record that there are approximately 130 Indian firms that are operating in South Africa in one way and another, and a number of Indian brands are well known and well established in South Africa, including Tata, Mahindra, and Cipla, among others. So I think that we have something to build on. Just to put the other side of the story, I think it's also important that it's not just India investing in South Africa, it's also South African companies investing in India. Between 2003 and 2018, 28 South African foreign direct investment projects have been recorded in India, with a total investment value of about 10 billion South African rand, and they've created over 5,000 jobs in India. So we do have a relationship that has been growing and does need and does provide us with a base. But I think that what we have concluded in our interactions to date, and what is the underlying motive for this business summit, is that we need to take that relationship a lot further forward. That we can do it, and that we need to do it. We can do it because, as has already been mentioned, India is one of the fast-growing economies in the world. It's a fast-growing economy also due to the policies associated with Prime Minister Modi, which have propelled India when many countries in the world were faltering and stuttering. India continued to be a fast-growing economy, and that's one part of it. And then on the other side of it is that South Africa, as has already been mentioned, is also on a new economic path. A new economic path which our President Matamela Cyril Ramaphosa, has called a new dawn. Now this new dawn is based on, underpinned by improving investor and consumer confidence. And this growing investor and consumer confidence is based on the fact that we have acted to deal with some of the challenges that have held us back in the past. So we have seen already a new broom sweeping the issues of governance and better performance of a number of our state-owned companies. We have seen action to reduce areas where we've had uncertainty in terms of policy and practice. And all of this, I think, is leading to a view that South Africa is on an upward trajectory, that the growth forecasts that we have at the moment are not the ceiling, but they are the floor that we can add to as we improve on all of these areas of economic performance. And indeed, it's worth saying that Goldman Sachs earlier this year has picked South Africa as the quote-unquote hot emerging market for this year of 2018. So I think that the circumstances in both our countries are propitious for us to deepen and strengthen our bilateral relations. And there's probably also another factor, and that is that later on this afternoon, I will have to leave this event because I need to engage in a teleconference to discover whether or not South Africa will be subject to punitive tariffs on steel and aluminium products to the biggest economy in the world. Now, that is coming against also last month. Minister Prabhu organized the first important political conversation to discuss where is the multilateral trading system going. And I think that this is indicating that there are shockwaves in the multilateral trading system, that our relations with our established trading partners are not necessarily what they were in the past, but also that the issue that Minister Gordon raised is a critical one. How do we work together to ensure that we have a more developmental, a more inclusive growth, and that trade is the servant of those two concepts, development and inclusive growth, and not something that trumps, to use a coin of phrase, that trumps those particularly important concepts. And I want to salute Minister Prabhu because he's risen to the challenge. We are very much, I think, on the same page on most of the issues that are confronting us in the World Trade Organization. We have very similar views on many issues, and Minister Prabhu has risen to the occasion by trying to take the lead in promoting that political conversation. But I think that also the more important point for the bilateral relationship is that we've actually got to find each other in the developing world, in the emerging markets, and strengthen the relations beyond that. Now, as I said earlier, I'm very pleased to say that we had a very good engagement yesterday with the CEOs Forum. And what we decided was that the CEOs Forum had begun to drill down to areas of sectoral cooperation that we could build on. And that led to a conclusion on our part that what we must do as government ministers is to ensure that we don't just let this slip until the next big event, but that we've identified a number of opportunities along the way where we can, as ministers, take stock of what's happening. We have urged our business people to follow through with regular engagements to make the areas that we've been talking about, that they've been talking about, and some other areas that we added, to make those things happen and become real business opportunities. Also, a little bit later, we will witness the signature of the agreement between Invest India and Invest South Africa, and that will enable, I think, those two agencies to also drill down to identify projects as well as sectors where we can cooperate and where we can move the relationship further forward. I would want to say as well that I'm very pleased that we have a number of colleagues from SACU, SADC with us here today, because South Africa has always taken the view that our destiny is inextricably linked with that of the rest of our partners in the continent and our immediate region. And I think that it's quite significant that right after Minister Prabhu's meeting at the WTO, we had the adoption by the heads of state of the African Union and the opening for signature of the agreements to put in place the African Continental Free Trade Area. That is an indication that this continent is on a journey towards establishing a large domestic market that will allow economic diversification, will allow and support broad-based industrialization across our continent. And I think that we would be very happy. I see later in the program that you will be having meetings with our colleagues who are here from other countries, and we sincerely hope that this bilateral engagement between South Africa and India can also result in a strengthening of bilateral relations between India and the other countries that are here present. So I think that what we want to say as South Africa is, Minister Gordon alluded to it, one of our key objectives as the government, as enunciated by our President, President Ramaphosa, is that we are seeking a major investment drive, that the President has said that over the next 3 years, we need to raise our investment, by $100 billion US. That is a stretch target, but it's something that can be achieved. If that is achieved, I think you will find South Africa in a much stronger place to be a partner with the region, with the continent, but also with countries like India. So I sincerely hope and trust that this will be a productive day for the business people who are here present, and that we certainly look forward to receiving a report of whatever transpires today. But I can also indicate that we are determined, both of us, Minister Prabhu and myself, to make sure that what was agreed in the business forum is actually implemented to the mutual benefit of all of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister. I mean, amongst the many conversations and the many things that we're going to hear today, particularly as members of the media, we keenly await the outcome of that call on the tariffs in the aluminium and the steel sector, and we certainly hope that sanity trumps whatever is going on there, because certainly world economists all over have warned how increased protectionism is actually more bad for global growth than good. But ladies and gentlemen, it is with the greatest pleasure that we now invite the Honorable Minister of Trade and Industry and Civil Aviation of the Government of India, Mr. Suresh Prabhu. So South Africa is indeed delighted to have you in our midst, and the entire world is now seeing the story of a new India unfold and the remarkable winds of change that are blowing across the country, where you play such a pivotal role in ensuring that that happens as in your capacity as Trade and Industry Minister. I should add that Mr. Prabhu is a chartered accountant by profession and has been a member of Parliament of India since 1996. He was the Honourable Minister of Power between 2000 and 2002, the Honourable Minister of Railways from November 2014 to September 2017, and since September 2017 is the Minister of Commerce and Industry. He took additional charge as the Honourable Minister of Civil Aviation in March 2018. And apart from his political role, he wears multiple hats, wherein he is a part of the 16 global organizations and 9 strategic dialogues, including the World Economic Forum, UNIDO, the UNDP, the World Federation of UESCO, Global Water Partnerships, and Global Forum for Farmers. So I'm particularly interested in hearing what you did in the rail industry there, as Mr. Pravin Gordhan alluded to. The floor is yours.
All my colleagues, honorable ministers, the industry leaders, our High Commissioner, and of course, MC, doing a good job. And I can see some of my other colleague ministers who are watching the performance, all of us from the wings, and finding out whether we are doing a good job or not. All the business leaders from both the sides, and all the distinguished friends. Good morning to all of you. When I was talking about ministers who were sitting down, one of the ministers is the youngest ever from Botswana. What it means? Africa and India are one of the youngest population living in these two geographies. So when you are the youngest minister ever in a particular country, that is showing the face of changing times. We need to look at what we need to do today is something, is not just for today. And there again, thanks for putting up these posters. They're really writing on the wall, literally. Wherein I can see in front of me, the future depends on what you do today. That's what Mahatma Gandhi said. So what we are going to do today is not just for today's contemporary problems, but this summit is essentially going to address the expectations of the young people who are expecting a lot of action from us today, and to plan for that, this summit is planned today. In fact, the world is fraught with several problems today. In fact, as my very dear friend Rob was saying, everybody is questioning. I'm not saying everybody, few of them are questioning the rationale behind a trading system, the global trading system. Just imagine, the trading system is in place for decades. Africa, India, other developing countries, we opened up our markets. We said, okay, it will benefit everybody. Please come and do business with us. Some countries benefited. Now it's a turn of Africa, India, and countries like developing countries like this to benefit from it. So at this time, you are questioning the whole rationale. If it was so, it should have been thought many decades ago. And therefore, we strongly believe that we would like to work on a rule-based, open, democratic, all-participating trading system. And to do that, we are all working together. And for what? It's not to benefit anybody. It's to solve the world's global problems. All the global leaders of the world met and said that we must remove and reduce poverty by half by 2000. That was the Millennium Development Goal. Now it has replaced by sustainable goals. But how do you remove poverty? We said not by aid, but by trade. And to do trade, we must have open trading system. And therefore, we are working on it, and we'll continue to work on it to make it better multilaterally. But while we do this, it's also important to find out what can be done bilaterally. And therefore, this summit today is essentially to address the huge potential that exists between India and the entire African continent, but particularly with southern African nations, and more particularly with South Africa and India. There's a huge potential. Again, I'm just reading one of the great, all-time great leader, Nelson Mandela, saying, we can change the world and make it better, but for that we must start acting today and work together. So what is that we are doing? We are working for a better world. I don't think anybody should have any objection to make the world a better place. And therefore, the huge potential that exists, we'd like to exploit together. And what is that we stand to lose? Only thing we may lose is poverty and injustice. And what we'll gain will not just be a gain for the two geographies, but as I said, because the world community committed to reduce poverty by half and reduce inequality, it will benefit and promote global good as well at the same time. And therefore, we are committed to do this, and I'm extremely happy that this is the first of its kind, first ever event, and we'll do it more as we go along. South Africa has been a great country. I must congratulate the South Africans. They have a new leader, new president. They are charting out a new path for progress. We in India have a dynamic Prime Minister who is talking about New India. In the next 5 years, we want to address several challenges that we face in the country by really making it a better India. That's New India. But New India is not an inclusive concept in terms of only India benefiting. We want India to benefit for sure, but we want, along with that, the benefit should accrue to all our friends, our traditional friends, long-time friends like Africans. And South Africa and India have been friends for a long time. And therefore, if we work together, we can make huge difference to the lifestyles of people and also for the future of the world. One of the things I was thinking about, and it has already been mentioned, and therefore I must congratulate all the business leaders. Mr. Anil Agarwal gave an excellent vision, and he said, we like to make investments, and again, he's putting his money where his mouth is. He's put actually one of the largest Indian investors in this part of the world. And we really mean that when we want to make this, we want to make it for the benefit of either side. We cannot have a trade deal, we cannot have investment treaty, we cannot have any agreement which will not benefit either side at the same time. So we want to make sure that Africa and India, South Africa and India work in a manner that will benefit both the societies. So creating jobs, as you mentioned, is a very important thing. We want to create jobs in India, but not at the expense of creation of jobs in South Africa. We want it to happen in both the cases. Make in India program of Government of India or Prime Minister's program is a very flagship program, but that doesn't mean we want to make everything in India. We want to make in India in a manner that we can also make part of it in South Africa, in other parts of Africa. Because what is a changing phase, which I mentioned? The changing phase is that global supply chains are going to happen. Already happened. Global value chains are happening. So you don't make manufacturing of all products in one place. It doesn't happen, the end-to-end manufacturing takes place in one place. Part of it will happen in some other parts of the world. And particularly when we are talking together of promoting global trade, and that's what we have been discussing, we can always have these supply chains put in place which will benefit either side. It will create some jobs in India, some jobs here, but it will benefit both of us. And in the absence of that supply chain, no jobs would have been created. So therefore, nobody is losing by saying that 100% jobs should come to me. Because 100% jobs will come to you theoretically, notionally, but no job will be created if there is no supply chain. And therefore, we must work together to make it happen. Africa, and particularly South Africa, is blessed with so many resources. In fact, sometimes I wonder, the best practice in the world are rated as platinum rated or gold rated. I think all of us is in now South Africa. Platinum, 85% of world's platinum reserves are in South Africa. Today, more than 44% of gold is South Africa produces. So all the standards that are set, I think their origin is in Africa. And therefore, we like to make sure that while we work on this, exploiting these resources in a way, as you mentioned, my friend, not forever, but do it in a more sustainable way, that while we do that and leverage on the resources available here, we must also plan for a new economy for tomorrow. And that new economy will also emerge from understanding each other better and finding out what we can do together. So I'm asking the Federation of Indian Exporters Organization, which are here, as well as Invest India, luckily they're sitting together as neighbors. All of them, while they're here, must prepare some sort of an action plan as to what India and Africa can do together, South Africa can do it together. So it's not a one-off event. That event ends, and then we all go home and say, what a beautiful dance we saw. It's not event for that. We are going to dance to the tunes of the changing times. And the changing times are that we must do business together. We must benefit from each other. So they will be preparing a plan, and the plan cannot be prepared in one day, I understand. But contours of the plan. And in the next few months' time, we would have proper action plan in place, which Minister Davison will sign after some time. In fact, I am supposed to come here also for the BRICS. At that time, we'll do it. But while we do this, we have excellent inputs provided by the CEOs Forum. I think I thank my good friend, Mr. Adi Godrej, as well as Mr. Reddy, who is sitting again here, that will actually use those inputs for planning for future. So I think FIO and Invest India will do that and prepare a plan based on those inputs. But idea would be that benefit must go to either side. We must share the benefit. We should make a common destiny for each one of us. And that is what we'll try to do. I'm very happy that there are so many other areas in which we can do the development. Services are going to grow faster than the merchandise. In services, South Africa has already done quite well. Banking, insurance, and many other sectors, South Africa is already a leader. In India, services constitute almost 2/3 of India's economy. And we are preparing a plan for a $5 trillion economy in which 60%, $3 trillion of economy will come from services. And in that, again, we are finding out synergy of working with Africa. In agriculture, which again is a huge potential, I am very happy that our very distinguished bureaucrat from India, who's the Secretary for Food Processing, is also here, Mr. Meena, and he's already preparing and finding out ways of working together with the Africans for food processing. Because much of the fruits and vegetables that we produce, much of the food that we produce is wasted before it reaches the marketplace. So farmer loses because he doesn't get a price for it. The customer loses, consumer loses because he is not able to eat it. So just imagine both the continents having a nutritional security problem. At the same time, we have enough food if we actually have it processed properly. So we'll do this in a big way. We'll work on it. We'll also work on manufacturing, as I mentioned, through the supply chain issue. So all three key elements of manufacturing, services, agriculture will make sure that we find out a common meeting ground for working together. In fact, for Indians, Africa is not a new place. And I must thank Africans for making India offer as a second home. In fact, we are very lucky that we can call Africa as a second home. Many of us are already here for ages, for centuries, including his forefathers came here many years ago. And actually we say, place that you belong to, Durban, we said probably the highest population outside India lives in Durban, Indian origin population lives in Durban. And therefore Mahatma Gandhi also draw inspiration in Durban. So Africa and India have so many things in common. So we don't measure relationship by virtue of just money invested into this place. We measure it by emotional connectivity, by having the common shared values, and therefore we all will work together to make it happen. So I think I'm really happy that we are working together. But again, looking at the poster which we say that if we don't act today, we are losing out an opportunity. In fact, this is always the case. I always give this example because some of the interest for me is water. And in fact, for South Africa, water is important, particularly Cape Town, for us, which is very, very important. Water, when it falls from the skies, the nature gives you an abundance. But if you don't utilize it, don't store it, don't make water harvesting, it's wasted. So this is the opportunity that is now staring at us. Opportunities are there, we must use them, put them to productive use, and then only we can substantially benefit. I'm very happy that we are going to work together in many areas. Little later we'll talk about our South African development community. and therefore Southern African Development Community, wherein again we like to work with you and make sure this happens. So let us be, in the changing times, changing world, let us all the countries be the frontline countries to fight our common threat, that's poverty and injustice. Let us do that, and then only we can say. So therefore, again, looking at what Gandhiji would say, the future depends on what you do today. So today is the day when we should start doing today. And this is the opportunity. We are very happy that I can say with pride and happiness that many of our distinguished leaders from India are here. I can see Mr. Noel Tata, who represents one of the largest and the oldest and respected trade empire in India, industrial house, Mr. Godrej, Adi Godrej, who has the customer base within India and outside, which is more than India's population. So that's the customer base he has got. I only hope that he doesn't contest election with so many customer base. I am very happy that Mr. Anil Agarwal has been running businesses all over the world, but he told me he has only 2 preferred destinations. He said, that's where my heart is. One is India, and other is Africa. So I think I'm very happy that you are the bridge to make sure that India-Africa relations taken to the new level. I thank everybody and put on record our sincere appreciation of effort put in by all the sides, particularly our High Commissioner and my good friend Rob and all his colleagues, to make this event a grand success. But success will not depend upon the grandeur of it. The success will depend upon how each one of you are going to sign the deals to make business potential exploited fully, to create opportunities for people back home. That's very important. Because in my opinion, development is not just increasing in GDP. Development is what benefits the people in our countries. If we can improve their life, that's what is development. And let's work towards it. I'm happy that all of us have this common desire and goal. We'll definitely succeed because our intentions are pretty good. All the best to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Honourable Minister. You have indeed moved the audience with this stunning account of the winds of change that are blowing across India. And I'm sure that many here are very much convinced that this will certainly usher in a new era in bilateral relations between our 2 countries as we forge ahead for the benefit of the 2 countries and our people. I would like to now invite Mr. Yunus Hussain, who is the acting head of Invest South Africa, and Mr. Deepak Bagla, who is the MD and CEO of Invest India, on stage. Invest India and Invest South Africa are today signing a MOU on cooperation between the 2 national investment promotion entities of India and South Africa, which are confident, and which we are confident will usher in a new era of bilateral investment promotion, as well as will ease out difficulties for potential investors in both countries. Please welcome them, ladies and gentlemen. Of state signed this very important MOU. Heads of the institutions, my bad. Apologies. I'm promoting you too early. As they sign this MOU, a bit of a background as the signing takes place. Invest India is the National Investment Promotion and Facilitation Agency of the Government of India. It is mandated to facilitate investments into India, and it operates under the Ministry of Commerce and Industry, the Government of India, and it serves as the first point of reference for investors. Thank you.